In this series, lowimpact.org talks with people working to build a mutually owned, democratic, decentralised economy that builds community and doesn't destroy nature. We want to increase collaboration to bring about system change. Find links to the sites mentioned in the videos in the description below. Join the conversation by liking, commenting and subscribing to our channel.
Today I'm talking with Jem Bendell, Professor of Sustainability Leadership at the University of Cumbria and author of the now famous 2018 Deep Adaptation paper that claimed that we're on an inevitable path to civilisational collapse. Hi, Jem.
Hello, Dave. Thanks for having me.
You've got a new book out, haven't you? Breaking Together, and you've changed your position slightly, haven't you? You're saying that collapse is a process, not an event, and that it's more than inevitable. It's already underway.
Yeah, so it's been 5 years since the Deep Adaptation paper came out. And I was fortunate enough to be supported with some funding to put a team of people together 2 years ago to actually look more closely at this issue of societal disruption, breakdown, possibly collapse. And yeah, I discovered it was a lot worse than I thought. And I also discovered my assumptions that this idea of societal collapse would have to be sudden rather than being a process that would already be unfolding. And yeah, in the research, we discovered that in the majority of countries around the world, the standard of living, all the indicators started going down around 2015, and you can relate those to the underlying systems, energy, food, biosphere, economy, money, climate. And so that means that as they're all breaking together, we're not going back. So the word collapse is an appropriate word for that ongoing process. And then the question is, what to do about it?
Yeah.
And what not to do about it?
Oh, yeah, I want to come to that later. First, I discovered you in 2011, by the way, in a TED talk about where money comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I wasn't into the money system at all. And I thought, well, it comes from the government, obviously. And you said, I bet you think it comes from the government, don't you? Yes, I do. And yeah, I learned from you that it doesn't. Almost all of it comes into existence when banks make loans. And then I did your MOOC, your massive online course, open online course that you developed with Matthew Slater. And I found Tom Greco and Matthew via you, and I found Dill Green via Matthew Slater. And I'm now working to promote and support mutual credit clearing, commons institutions, nationally and globally with Low Impact, and locally with Stroud Commons. So you were very instrumental in where I am now.
It's wonderful to hear the impact. I mean, so Matthew Slater, who you mentioned, in 2008, he introduced me to a deeper critique of the money system. You know, I'd been working on sustainability since 1995 with my first job at WWF. And even back then, people I came across and stuff I would read would say, oh, the reason why we're not actually having any major impacts on the direction in terms of environment, deforestation, all sorts of aspects, is because of the destructive expansionist monetary system.
Yeah,
and I thought,
yeah.
Okay, that sounded more or less right, but I didn't really understand much more about, and it sounded a bit abstract and as if we couldn't really do anything about it. So it took me quite a long time to actually give it more attention, study it, and Matthew helped with that. And then I realized that, yes, the debt-based system, where our money is issued by banks at interest, where unless they spend everything they earn back into circulation, then as the loans are paid off, the money dries up. So you need to keep having more and more loans and therefore more and more economic activity just to keep things okay, rather than having an economic collapse. And from that, then, there are two ways to go. One is to say, well, we need monetary reform, and the other is to say, well, that's never happened, it's not going to happen. So why don't we go ahead with getting on with our own alternative systems? And of course, crypto came along and sort of marginalized a lot of the things that Matthew and you were working on. But it's really good to see how that's also now sort of, there's a bit of a leap forward in terms of technology and systems and protocols. So you can really do what you're doing locally to help people exchange as much as they wish with each other without relying on a bank or a crypto billionaire to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put links to mutual credit information in the description so that people know what we're talking about. But yeah, it's basically a system in which money isn't a thing that can be extracted from communities and concentrated. And that sort of kills the corporate business model, doesn't it?
Yeah. So you mentioned my book. I mean, I have a whole chapter on the money system, and then also a whole chapter on how the money system feeds through into corporate behavior, marketing, advertising, mortgages, debt, rent, and so on, and therefore how it really enslaves us to a particular way of being in the world. So a big part of the book is to say it's not actually our personal freedoms that added up to destroying the biosphere. It's actually our unfreedom, the fact that we've grown up in this abusive, controlling, expansionist monetary system, and then the corporate systems that are built on top of that. So we've all been manipulated, coerced, encouraged to participate in a destructive approach to life. And so we don't actually know what it would be like to live free of that, how much we could actually be cooperating with each other rather than harming each other in nature. So when I talk about a freedom-loving environmentalism, it's about freeing ourselves from that expansionist monetary system and the corporate systems connected to it, and the whole ideologies, what I call imperial modernity, that are connected to that, and allowing ourselves to collaborate better with each other and find ways of living more in harmony with nature.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit more about collapse. In the book, you say that most people will probably find the idea of collapse shocking. That's actually not my experience. Almost everyone I talk with believes that we're headed for some sort of disaster. Maybe it's the circles I move in. My wife and I spoke with 3 20-year-olds the other day. We just met them in the pub. We shared a table with them. And all 3 of them independently said they weren't having kids. Because it wasn't fair to bring them into this world. And I said, how many other, are you unusual? How many other people feel this way? And they said, most young people feel this way. And what I'm more shocked by is the kickback that you've had from some on the left. I mean, I'd expect it from capitalists. And, NASA says that without major action to reduce carbon emissions, we're headed for 2.5 to 4.5 degrees increase by 2100. But 2022 saw the highest carbon emissions ever. So that major action isn't coming, is it?
So I have the same experience chatting with young people. I just had lunch with a guy who's 24, and he's not unusual in thinking that modern society, modern industrial consumer lifestyles are not only unsustainable, but they're already in decline. And that was a feeling he had before the disruptions from the pandemic and the policies on the pandemic. So yes, and opinion polls show that young people generally are much more pessimistic than the older generations about the future. And what we see is a lot of gaslighting going on, but with adults basically framing this as the young people having some kind of mental health issue, rather than them actually being more alive to what's happening in the world. Because young people have less invested in the society the way it is, less of their identity, worldview, and so on. And so they're more open to this kind of information. However, this issue is taboo still in mainstream media. It's even actually also suppressed in social media. Various different things are fact-checked and suppressed and hidden by Facebook. So unfortunately, young people are not having well, none of us, in fact, it's not just young people, none of us are actually being invited to have open-minded, open-hearted conversations about how to live with that kind of view of the future, understand exactly as you said how it's too late to avoid massive disruption and huge ecological damage, but still stay positively engaged. So we've always assumed somehow in modern cultures that humans are in control, that progress, material progress, is inevitable.
Yeah.
Those two things are very juvenile concepts. They're not in pre-modern or ancient wisdom traditions or whatever. And we can find ways of living to the max, living fully, living creatively, meaningfully without thinking that humans are in control of nature or thinking that progress is inevitable, and we need to have those conversations. And so that's also why I'm being more public. So when the whole deep adaptation thing took off, that was an accident. It wasn't for the general public. That paper was for my profession and for me to say, hi guys, we're bullshitters, I'm off. It wasn't talking to anyone else. And I was a bit awkward about how to talk to the general public about these things. I since then I've studied a lot of psychology, and I've talked to psychologists, and I understand a lot more. And so I've come to the point now where I realize it's time that we actually do try and help people understand that they're not alone if they see the world this way. And let's have more creative, meaningful conversations about it. Find some fellowship around it. So that's the reason for this book. You mentioned something about, what did you say? The left.
Yeah,
Pushback from the left.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, you know, opposition coming from capitalists wanting to preserve their power and their system, but you've been criticized for talking about this by some on the left. They say you're a doomer. So my question is, are you a doomer? And if so, you're saying capitalism is doomed, aren't you? Not humans or nature.
Right. So it's not just the left. There's been an incredible spectrum of public commentators, experts who have criticized me, often not very accurately, which to me reflects more of a sort of an instinctive and emotional just reaction and rejection of the general idea that we can't transition safely to a new arrangement and avoid massive harm. And I'm not going to speculate on all of those. It's a lot of people. I'm not going to speculate on their inner worlds. But what I do remember is how I reacted badly in the past. I mean, when Dark Mountain came out, was it 2009? And I was working my butt off for corporate sustainability and also with some charities and campaign groups on climate change and other environmental issues. I didn't like hearing that suddenly people were getting attention for saying, no, it's not going to work. This civilization, this way of life is going to break down through environmental change. I assumed that meant giving up. I assumed that meant apathy. I assumed that meant nihilism. I assumed it meant despair and nothing good to come out of it. But those assumptions were not just fact. Those assumptions were created in me by modernity, by my culture. I was thinking culture's thoughts. I didn't study. I didn't look at what motivates people. And actually, the psychological studies show that catastrophic imaginaries are more motivating than thinking that, you know, some technology, some business, some hero, some billionaire was going to fix things for us.
Yes.
So I was wrong. And I was just thinking my culture's thoughts. I wasn't looking at it more. Why wasn't I looking at it more? Because it was scary to me. It was scary to my identity. It was scary to the idea of maybe I'd wasted decades of my life. It was scary to my status. It was scary to my lifestyle, my income. It's painful stuff. So I think because of not being emotionally resourced, including spiritually resourced, but also not knowing enough wise people, and having deep conversations with them about my inner world and my aversions, I blanked it out. Now, if Dark Mountain had got as much publicity as my work had done, then maybe I might have even been aggressive in criticizing them publicly, like people have with me. So I understand it in terms of I understand my past self and my aversions and how painful this topic is. It's obviously very disappointing when people misrepresent what I say to try and delegitimize the topic entirely. So they falsely claim that I said the methane cannon was going off in the Arctic, or they falsely claim that in the Deep Adaptation paper, I said that 400 nuclear power stations are going to melt down and we are going to go extinct. I didn't say that. Or when they falsely claim that it's good that Indians went to reservations. No, the Deep Adaptation paper talked about how we could learn from the oral traditions and the histories of those civilizations and societies that collapsed in the past. And I talked about how we have stories about how the first peoples in North America talked about what their options were. And we should read that and think about it. Whether this could be something we could listen to. And there are also Native Americans now, Lila June, for example, who are actually inviting us to start looking at the oral traditions and other ways of thinking of Indigenous peoples as we face societal breakdown. So it's very disappointing when things get misrepresented to try and basically use moral psychology to cancel a topic by cancelling a person as just bad.
Yeah.
Because we could have lots of conversations about, well, what's the best way and worst way and of responding to a conclusion that collapse of modern life is either inevitable or already underway. I don't agree with a lot of people who share the same conclusion that collapse is either inevitable or already underway. So, for example, I do not agree with a lot of so-called doomers. I don't agree that there's no point in looking at the cause of this mess. I don't agree that any species that would get a non-renewable influx of a resource would be inevitably over procreating and destroying their environment. Those are very actually self-serving, emotionally avoidant, scientifically incorrect views. So I talk about it in the book, and I say that I find that there's a lot of aversion to guilt and to shame in the so-called doomosphere, so they just don't want to look at this mess. So in the book, I say there's a different way of responding, which is to be becoming free from the culture and the systems of modernity, and becoming more courageous, compassionate, creative, radical, because of your anticipation of collapse. And in my case, in many cases, people are more courageous, compassionate, creative, radical. So in the book, I'm just saying, well, let's call us something else other than doomer. Let's call ourselves doomsters. Right. So I even decided for my book tour, I'll make a t-shirt. So it kind of sums up this creative approach to living with this view of the future. And,
and it's I mean, I look at it as building lifeboats. Or safety nets within communities for what's coming. And as I said, I don't think most people think the future is going to be bright and cheerful.
Yeah, so there's often a bit of a misunderstanding about what lifeboats means. I mean, in your case, you're actually just thinking, well, I want to help more people in community find ways to look after each other without relying on the rest of the world's resources.
Yeah.
So some people think, oh, it's more about keeping people out, but that there's nothing actually in Britain where Britain relies on the 60% to 70 to 80% of its food is coming from elsewhere in the world. It's certainly never going to be a lifeboat unless it relocalizes production.
Yeah. It's very fragile. It's very fragile, isn't it? Sorry, it's very fragile, isn't it?
It's one of the most. Britain is one of the most fragile places in the world. It's a bit scary how dependent and how arrogantly, ignorantly dependent it is on the rest of the world's resources.
Yeah.
So yeah, the work you're doing and other people in Britain to try and relocalize production, consumption, it really is quite simple. It's just helping people to reconnect with their neighbors and their communities, to grow together, to grow food, to cook together, to play together, to share resources, help each other out.
Yeah,
it's not. It's not. It's not new. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to just quickly ask you about governments. they're not going to provide the solutions, are they? They're all sort of locked into a capitalist game to grow GDP. And they had 27 years of COP meetings followed by record carbon emissions isn't a very good record. And plus, they continue to subsidize fossil fuels and fund their war machines. Here's a direct question. Do you think COP meetings are a waste of time and aviation fuel?
Do I think COP meetings are a waste of time? And yeah. I'm beginning to think COP meetings are worse than a waste of time.
Oh.
I'm beginning to think COP meetings are part of an ongoing delusion which distracts people who care. You know, people who, they're good to care about the world. But when I was in Egypt at the COP27, I'd been warned, but absolutely, it was a career fest and trade fair at the end of the world. It's all about people doing business and progressing their own personal success. It's pretty sick, to be honest. The more I've studied it, the more I now realize that there are major problems with establishment climatology as enshrined, defined, upheld, promoted by the IPCC. So I think the whole agenda on climate is distorted, and it's distorted in a way that mirrors the ideology, preoccupation, skill set, and funding interests of people who become climate scientists. It's interesting about where you draw the line around what's a climate scientist and what isn't. Like, why shouldn't engineers be climate scientists? People like Ye Tao are bringing huge, new, powerful insights. So yeah, I could mention a bit about, but the thing is with collapse, it's much more than climate, but climate is an accelerator of all the other problems, as well as a massive problem in itself. And it's really weird in some ways that when we are witnessing a climate going bonkers in terms of weather, ocean temperatures, there's also growing skepticism in society about the official narrative on how climate change is occurring and what's to blame. And there's also growing resistance to bold action on it, because it's seen as synonymous with authoritarians and global capitalists just trying to control us and take our government money for their own counterproductive, ecologically dubious schemes like direct air capture of carbon. So it's a total mess. Not only have we got an ecological climate crisis, we've got a crisis of the really stupid, greedy, counterproductive responses to that crisis.
Yeah.
And justifiable, understandable negative reaction to them. I call them the fake green globalists in chapter 13 of my book.
Yeah.
And say that we need to try and, the environmental movement needs to be reclaimed from those interests and their ideologies. For example, the lie of decoupling,
Yes.
which has been known as a lie for decades. But I didn't know about that until I studied it in the last couple of years. It's sort of been hidden. So decoupling, for those of people who don't know, it's this idea that we can square the circle of an expansionist monetary system. You know, we don't have to worry about why is it we're being forced to grow. If we're a sovereign free people, why can't we just choose to consume as much this year as last year, or a bit less? Why not? Why aren't we free to do that? Square the circle of that by saying, oh, well, we'll decouple GDP growth from resource consumption or any energy consumption. It doesn't happen. Efficiencies lead to more demand. Wherever you look, more renewable energy doesn't displace fossil fuels. Recycling metals doesn't stop mining for metals. It just doesn't happen. So
that's Jevons paradox, isn't it?
Yeah. I was reading. So he published that 160 years ago.
Yeah. The James Watt steam engine.
If anyone should be going sort of supersonic, turning in their grave, it should be William Stanley Jevons.
Yeah.
So, yes. So COP. Actually, I do want to say something about this issue. So, big establishment climatology has sought to make it seem like carbon dioxide is a thermostat on world temperature. It's not. It's a massively important issue. It is a temperature amplifier. but it's not the only factor influencing temperatures. And because of this sort of carbon reductionism, carbon fundamentalism, the establishment climatology has left the door open for all the, you know, opportunist deniers. Prior to human disturbance of the atmosphere in the last 200 years, putting about 50% more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than before, world temperatures warmed up, not because of carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide increases lagged warmer weather by 200 to 300 years. Now that doesn't disprove carbon as a greenhouse gas, of course not. But what it shows is that carbon dioxide amplifies warming, and therefore we might not only have, and by the way, that carbon dioxide most people think came from warmer oceans releasing more carbon dioxide, but what it means is that we're not in control. You know, we could have some, well, we're going in, the last 18 months we've been in a period with more sunspots. We're about to have a warm ocean, Pacific Ocean current, the El Nino. These things could tip us over the edge into a terrible state with the world's climate, because we've got so much carbon in the atmosphere to amplify those other disturbances. So yeah, the other thing that has been ignored is the importance of deforestation, not just in producing carbon, but producing clouds through how forests produce pollen and bacteria that seed clouds. That was downplayed as a local or regional phenomenon, but it's not. It's a global phenomenon. So in Tibet, you've got snow where it's been nucleated by forests from around the world. And in the last 120 years, we've deforested the world as much as humans deforested the world for the previous 9,000 years. So it's clear that forest clearance is another major cause of the global ambient temperature rise. And it's really been made it's just been drowned out by this total focus on carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere and getting to net zero and stuff. We should be having massive reforestation programs, but fair and sustainable, appropriate, in partnership with communities. We should be stopping all deforestation now, and we should be rolling out agroforestry and regenerative agriculture everywhere. And right now, not with this idea that it saves this society, but that it might save the human race. You know, it's that scary. I'm not saying we're going to go extinct, but we're getting into a total mess, and so we need to broaden and deepen and speed up climate action.
If you like our channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. The more people like our videos and subscribe to our channel, the more the YouTube algorithm will share them. It doesn't cost anything, so please press the like and subscribe buttons. And if you click the bell icon just underneath as well, you'll get a notification when we upload a new video. Thank you.